My dad said his stepdaughter's name 11 times in his Father's Day speech. Mine 0, I counted. 2 hours before he said, I finally have the daughter I deserve, I'd already filed the papers. My father said Megan's name 11 times in that speech. He said mine 0, I counted. I am a structural engineer. Counting is not a nervous habit. It is a professional disposition. I design load-bearing systems for buildings, which means I spend my working life understanding the precise relationship between what a structure carries and what it can withstand. Weight, distribution, failure points. The exact moment when what something is holding becomes more than what it was built for. I counted 11. I counted 0. And I sat at the far end of my father's dining room table between a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years and an empty chair, and I did the math, and the math came out the same way it always comes out. The 48-hour window was still open. 2 hours earlier, I had decided not to close it. My grandfather Harold Frell built Frell & Sons Construction from a wheelbarrow and a handshake network in Raleigh, North Carolina, starting in 1971. By the time he died in 2009, the company had 12 employees, a solid regional reputation, and contracts that required someone with a structural engineering background to review properly. My grandfather had watched me graduate with my engineering degree in 2007 and had understood, I think, what that meant for the company's future. He left me 40%. The trust vested when I turned 30. Standard language, a good attorney, an independent trustee to manage the mechanics until the date arrived. My father received 55%. The remaining 5% went to the company's operations manager, a man named Dale who had been with Harold since 1988 and who was, as a result, the most competent person in any room that also contained my father. My grandfather also left me a note, handwritten, 3 sentences. I have it in the fireproof box with the trust documents. Your father is a good man with a weak spine. This 40% is your seat at the table. Don't give it up for anyone. I kept the note. I kept the documents. I kept showing up for 14 years. That is not a metaphor. 14 years of quarterly reviews I drove to and sat through and contributed to and left without anyone acknowledging that the reason the load calculations on 3 major commercial projects hadn't failed inspection was because I had caught the errors. 14 years of showing up with my engineering credentials and my grandfather's 40% and being treated, in the specific language of furniture, as something people worked around rather than with. My father married Diane Mitchell when I was 18. Diane was warm the way certain spaces are warm, selectively, directionally, toward the people and things she had decided mattered. The warmth extended to my father, to her daughter Megan, to the neighbors and relatives she was managing. It was real warmth, I want to be clear about that. I don't think it was performance. I think Diane genuinely loved the people she chose to love and had simply, without malice, not chosen me. Megan was 8 when they married. She is now 30, and she works in marketing. And I have no particular feeling about Megan that I would characterize as negative. She was a child when this began, and she received what she received, and the accounting of that is with the people who made the decisions, not with her. What I want to describe is the disappearing. It happened in stages, the way most disappearing does, slowly enough that each individual step was explainable in isolation, and only the full sequence revealed the direction. The family photo on the mantle changed first, new one after the wedding. I was in it. Then a different frame. A few years later, I was smaller. Then a portrait taken at a family event I had attended. I remembered the event. I remembered standing in the group, and somehow I was not in the final print hanging on the wall. Then Christmas cards. Then the version of the family my father described at company events, which featured Diane and Megan and the home they had built, and did not, in any version I heard, feature me. By the time I was 30, I was in none of the frames. Not removed with hostility, just not included, not renewed. Like a subscription that had lapsed and nobody had noticed because nobody was checking. I sent emails, certified letters, formal written requests to be included in financial reviews, the reviews of the company I partly owned, where decisions were being made that legally required my knowledge and consent. 14 emails over 2 years, 3 voicemails, 2 certified letters with return receipt requested, which meant I had the green cards in my fireproof box showing the signatures of receipt, 0 responses. I had told my attorney, Martin Gales, 21 years in corporate and estate law in North Carolina, a man who had been practicing since before I was born, and who had the quality of someone who has seen most of what people do to each other for money. I had told Martin in a meeting in February that something was coming, and I wanted to be ready when it arrived. What kind of something? He asked. The kind that requires a 48-hour window, I said. Martin drafted the voluntary relinquishment paperwork that week. He built in the clause himself, clause 7.3, mandatory buyback at appraised fair market value, triggered upon relinquishment, $320,000, 90 days to comply. He told me the window would open whenever I told him to start the clock. I told him to start it Thursday. The Father's Day dinner invitation came directly from my father. This was unusual enough that I called Aunt Patrice before I responded. Patrice was my mother's sister and had maintained a steady, undemonstrative presence in my life since my mother died when I was 9. Not intrusive, not performative, simply consistent. She was 63 and had spent enough years adjacent to my father's household to have developed a clear-eyed read of its patterns. He's planning something, she said. Diane hired a photographer for a Father's Day family dinner. I told Patrice I'd be there. The Saturday before the dinner, I drove to my father's house to help set up. This was not requested. It was the thing I had always done, because my mother taught me that you showed up and you helped, and you did not require an invitation to demonstrate care. I carried folding chairs from the garage. I hung the banner, Happy Father's Day in script, Diane's aesthetic, not mine. I straightened the centerpieces on the table. Then I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. On the counter, next to the coffee maker, a gold-framed certificate. Empty, no names filled in yet, but a small card had been tucked inside the frame. Certificate of Adoption, State of North Carolina. I stood at that kitchen counter for approximately 30 seconds. Then I picked up my keys. I drove to Martin's office that afternoon. Start the clock, I said. Thursday, as scheduled, he said. 48-hour hold. If you call me before Sunday at 2:14 p.m., I shred everything. If I don't hear from you, I file Monday at 9. Draft the papers, I said. I'll sign them tonight. I signed them that evening. Then I drove back to my father's house the next morning to help with the centerpieces, because that is the kind of person I am, and because I had decided that this dinner was going to happen exactly as my father had planned it, and I was going to be present for every moment, and I was not going to interrupt anything. I was going to let him finish. I found Diane's phone on the counter the next morning, face up, screen lit. She had left it there when she went to answer the door. I was not snooping. I was standing at the counter cutting flowers for the centerpiece arrangement. The phone lit up with a notification from a group text. 3 names in the thread: Rick, Diane, Megan. I was not in the thread. Diane's message, sent 40 minutes earlier. After Sunday, we reclassify her shares as dormant. Talk to the accountant Monday. Legal says we can if she's not participating in governance. My father's reply: she won't even notice. She never comes to meetings. I had attended 11 of the last 14 quarterly reviews. Megan's response: can we change the locks on the office to LOL? I took 3 screenshots, sent them to my own number, deleted the sent confirmation from Diane's message log. Then I put the flowers in the vase and drove to Martin's office to tell him the filing was not theoretical. They're planning to reclassify my shares as dormant, I said, on the basis that I'm not participating in governance. They've been ignoring my certified letters for 2 years. Martin looked at the screenshots. So they built the argument, he said, and documented it in a text thread. Yes. He looked at me over his glasses. Francis, this is the cleanest corporate misconduct case I've seen in 11 years. I don't want a corporate misconduct case, I said. I want the voluntary relinquishment to go through. Clean, legal, final. That's what I'll file Monday, he said. The screenshots are insurance. I went home. I set my good dress out for Sunday. I did not call Martin to close the window. Sunday arrived with the specific quality of a day that has been prepared for. The table was set by 5 o'clock. Good china. Candles Diane had picked from a boutique in Chapel Hill. The kind of arrangement that says, this evening matters. We are marking something. I arrived at 6. My seat was at the far end of the table, between cousin Derek, whom I had last seen at a funeral in 2021, and an empty chair. Not a named place setting, just an unused space, as if someone had been expected and not shown. I sat down. I ate the salad course. I answered Derek's questions about structural engineering with the 2-sentence version I had developed for exactly this context, and he nodded and turned back to his plate. At 7:15, my father tapped his wine glass. Diane dimmed the lights. She had clearly practiced this. The timing of the dimming was precise, correlated with the tap, which meant they had rehearsed. The photographer positioned herself near the head of the table. Her camera was already up. My father stood. He was 61 years old, and he had my grandfather's jaw and not my grandfather's spine, which is something Harold had understood when he wrote the note, and which I had been understanding in real time for 32 years. He talked for 4 minutes. He talked about Diane's cooking and the house they had built together, and what it meant to have found real family late in life. He talked about Megan, her laugh, her spirit, the way she had made their house feel like a home. He talked about building something from the ground up, which was a phrase I noted with a particular quality of attention, because the thing that had actually been built from the ground up was my grandfather's company, which was currently paying my father's mortgage at a 40% discount, because I had not yet exercised the clause I had signed 2 days prior. He said Megan's name 11 times. I counted. Then he reached behind his chair and lifted the gold frame from a small easel I hadn't noticed. Megan Elizabeth Mitchell, as of this month, I am legally adopting you as my daughter. The room erupted. Diane's hands went to her face and she wept with the immediacy of someone who had been holding it for weeks. Megan made a sound I recognized as genuine, not performed, real, and threw her arms around my father's neck. Cousins applauded. Diane's mother said something in a voice pitched high with praise. The photographer moved fluidly around the moment, shooting from 3 angles, the flash going off in bursts. My father held Megan at arm's length and looked at the room. His chin was trembling. His eyes were wet. I finally have the daughter I always deserved. Flash, flash, flash. I looked at the 25 people in that room. Not one of them looked at me, not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that, because I have thought about it many times, and I believe it is accurate. They didn't look at me because I was not a character in the story my father was telling. I had been edited from that story so gradually and so completely that my presence at the table was simply ambient. Furniture, background, part of the setting rather than the scene. I was the empty chair. I sat with my hands in my lap and I looked at my father's face, genuinely moved, genuinely happy, genuinely present in a way he had not been in my direction in longer than I could specifically recall. And I felt something I want to describe accurately rather than dramatically. Not rage, not grief exactly. Not something more like the feeling you get when a load calculation finally confirms what you already knew. When the numbers you've been running in your head match the numbers on the page and the structure is exactly exactly as compromised as you had determined it to be. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. Confirmation. 40 years of confirmation, delivered in a gold frame to 25 witnesses. I helped clear the dishes. I always help clear the dishes. My mother taught me that you showed up and helped regardless of what you were feeling, because the dishes needed to be cleared and someone had to do it, and it did not have to be a statement. I carried plates to the kitchen. I scraped and rinsed with the methodical efficiency of someone who has done this at many family dinners and long since stopped requiring it to mean anything. Aunt Patrice found me in the hallway near the coat closet. She looked at my face. "I'm leaving," I said. She pulled me into a hug that lasted several seconds. When she pulled back, her eyes were doing something I appreciated. They were not performing anything. They were just present. "What are you going to do?" she asked. What I should have done 2 years ago. I walked to the living room. My father was in his recliner with his reading glasses on, showing Megan something on his phone. The gold-framed certificate was propped on the side table. The room had the soft noise of a gathering winding down, lower voices, jackets being retrieved, the particular comfort of a successful evening. "Happy Father's Day, Dad." He looked up. "Thanks, Franny. Drive safe." He looked back at Megan's phone. "Send that one to Uncle Gene," he said. I walked out. I drove home and sat in my dark kitchen for 47 minutes. The 48-hour window closed at 2:14 p.m. the next day. I sat with that window for 47 minutes. I want to be honest about what I was doing during those 47 minutes, because I think the honest version is more interesting than the strategic one. I was not calculating. I had already calculated. Martin had already filed the structural analysis. I had already read the load numbers. I was not deciding whether the building was compromised. I was sitting with the fact that my father was in that building. Weak spine. That was what Harold had written. Not a cruel man, a weak-spined one. And I had spent my entire adult life watching those two things interact. The genuine warmth he was capable of, the genuine love he probably had for me somewhere in the architecture of himself, and the absolute reliable failure to deploy either of them when Diane's preferences were running in the opposite direction. "Drive safe," he had said. Not because he didn't care, because he was already looking at Megan's phone, because I was ambient, because the story he was telling himself about his family had, at some point in the last 14 years, been quietly revised to exclude me, and the revision had been so gradual and so consistent that it had calcified into belief. He believed I was peripheral. He had also, I noted, been informed by his wife in a text message that my shares were going to be reclassified as dormant. He had replied, "She won't even notice." 40% of a company his father built. He didn't think I'd notice. I looked at my watch. I went to bed. Monday morning, 9:03 a.m. "Martin, window closes at 2:14, he said. "You have time. File it." A pause. "You're certain?" "I've been certain since Saturday morning," I said. "I just needed Sunday to be on the record." "Filing now," Martin said. The certified letter reached my father 9 days later. He called me that afternoon. His voice had a quality I had not heard in it before. The specific register of a man who has received financial news that does not fit the story he was telling himself about his situation, shaking, not with grief, with the particular tremor of someone who has discovered that the floor they were standing on was not the floor they thought it was. "What is this? What did you do?" "This letter says we owe you $320,000. I had the trust documents in front of me. Clause 7.3, I said. "Voluntary relinquishment with mandatory buyback at appraised fair market value. The appraisal was conducted by Hendricks Business Valuation Group. Your own company's accounting firm uses them for annual review. The figure is current and defensible." I paused. "You have 90 days to comply." "Francis," his voice changed. "Come to the house, sit down with me and Diane. We'll talk about this as a family." I noted the word. "My attorney will be in touch," I said. "This is a legal matter now. You're going to destroy everything I built." I looked at my blueprints. The current project, a mixed-use commercial building in Durham, load calculations spread across 3 monitors. "Grandfather built it," I said. "You decided who the family was." He said several more things. I let him say them. When he was finished, I told him Martin's contact information and ended the call. Martin referred me to a corporate attorney named Sandra Osei, 14 years in closely held business disputes, former partner at a Charlotte firm that handled exactly this category of case. She reviewed the full file, including the screenshots from Diane's phone documenting the plan to reclassify my shares without my knowledge or consent. "The relinquishment is clean," she said. "The buyback clause triggers cleanly. The $320,000 figure is defensible." She set down the screenshots. "These, however, insurance," I said. "If they dispute the buyback figure, these become Exhibit A in a shareholder oppression claim. The text specifically documents a plan to eliminate your governance rights based on a pattern of exclusion they manufactured by not responding to your communications." She looked at me. "How many certified letters?" 2. "I have the green receipt cards." Sandra looked at the cards. "Francis, they built the oppression case for you and sent a receipt. We filed the buyback demand formally on a Wednesday. My father's attorney responded 12 days later with a request for mediation, which Sandra accepted on the condition that the 90-day clock continued to run during the process. The mediator was a retired circuit court judge named David Purcell, 30 years on the bench, 16 years in private mediation. He was 70 and wore bow ties and had the quality of a man who had watched enough people in rooms together to find nothing surprising, but still find things worth paying attention to. My father brought Diane. My father's attorney had clearly advised him to be conciliatory, which produced a version of my father I recognized as the version Harold had described in the note, the good man trying to operate with a spine someone else was providing. He said that he understood I felt overlooked. He said that the dinner had perhaps not been handled well. He said that he had never intended to exclude me from the company's governance, and that the text messages had been taken out of context. Diane did not speak. She sat beside my father with her hands folded and looked at the table. I looked at Judge Purcell. I want to be clear about what I'm asking for, I said. I am not asking to undo the adoption. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for the $320,000 my grandfather's trust entitled me to upon relinquishment at the value his company achieved under the management structure my work helped support for 14 years. That is all. Judge Purcell looked at my father. Mr. Frell, he said. In my experience, the simplest resolution of these matters is usually also the fastest. You've received the appraisal figure. Your own accounting firm conducted it. Do you dispute the number? My father looked at Diane. That look, the direction of it, the specific weighting quality of it, the way his response was held in suspension until she gave him something, told me everything Harold had known when he wrote the note. No, my father said. We don't dispute the number. The settlement was finalized at $320,000. Payment in full within 60 days, secured by a personal guarantee against the company's assets. Martin called me when the wire cleared. Done, he said. Thank you, I said. Harold would have enjoyed this, Martin said. He would have preferred it hadn't been necessary, I said. Martin was quiet a moment. Yes, he said. I suppose that's true. Aunt Patrice came for dinner in October. We sat at my kitchen table, and I made the pot roast my mother had taught me, and Patrice brought wine she knew I liked, and we talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with any of this. Her garden, my current project in Durham, Eli's soccer season, the book she was reading. Near the end of the evening, she asked, "Do you regret any of it?" I thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. I regret that it was necessary, I said. I don't regret what I did. Harold would have agreed with that distinction, she said. I know, I said. He wrote it down. She raised her glass. I raised mine. Outside, the October dark was complete and cold, and the lights of the neighborhood were on in every window, each one containing some version of a family doing whatever families do when the evening comes in and the doors close and the accounting of the day gets settled. I thought about the empty chair at the end of my father's table. I thought about the note in my fireproof box. Your seat at the table. Don't give it up for anyone. I had given it up, but I had read the clause first.